The stage rattled into Boise, Idaho Territory, on a dusty September afternoon in 1878, carrying a woman whose heart hammered harder than the horse's hooves against packed earth. Ophelia Graves clutched her carpetbag with white-knuckled fingers, watching through the window as wooden buildings materialized from the heat shimmer like a mirage she was afraid might disappear. 23 years old, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Pennsylvania to meet a man she had corresponded with for 8 months, but never seen. Her letters had been honest, perhaps too honest. She had written that she was plain, that men in Philadelphia had passed her by without a second glance, that her features were unremarkable and her figure ordinary. She had wanted no false expectations, no disappointment shining in his eyes when they finally met. The truth was more complicated than plain. Ophelia had coppery hair that caught sunlight like a penny at the bottom of a creek, green eyes that seemed to shift between sage and emerald depending on what she wore, and a dusting of freckles across her nose that she had always thought made her look perpetually young. Her figure was slender, perhaps too much so by the standards of women who were considered beauties, and her hands bore small scars from helping her father in his printing shop before fever had taken both her parents the previous winter. She had written to Ethan Abbott, a rancher who had advertised for a wife, out of practicality as much as hope. She had no family left, no prospects, and the idea of starting fresh in a place where the mountains touched the sky had appealed to something wild in her soul she had not known existed. The stage lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and the driver called out their arrival. Ophelia's traveling companions, a portly merchant and his pinch-faced wife, gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency. The woman had barely spoken to Ophelia during the journey, having learned she was a mail-order bride and clearly finding such arrangements distasteful. Ophelia stepped down from the stage on shaking legs, her blue calico dress dusty from the road despite her best efforts to keep it clean. She had made it herself, careful stitches by lamplight, wanting to look her best even if she could never be beautiful. The afternoon sun was fierce, hotter than she had expected Idaho to be in autumn, and she raised one hand to shade her eyes as she scanned the street. Men moved past on horseback and on foot, going about their business. A dog trotted by, tongue lolling. Somewhere a hammer rang against an anvil. She did not know which man was Ethan Abbott, and sudden panic seized her throat. What if he took one look at her and decided he had made a terrible mistake? What if her letters had given him hope she could not fulfill? Miss Graves. The voice came from behind her, low and quiet, and she turned so quickly her carpetbag swung against her legs. A man stood there, and her breath caught because he was not what she had expected. His letters had been practical, discussing the ranch and the land and what their life together might look like. But he had not described himself except to say he was 30 years old and in good health. The man before her was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of hard work rather than excess, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes so intensely blue they seemed like chips of summer sky. His face was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often, but could be kind when it did. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slightly, and there was something almost nervous in the gesture that made Ophelia's panic ease a fraction. He was uncertain, too. "Yes," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I am Ophelia Graves. Are you Mr. Abbott?" He nodded slowly, but he did not speak. His gaze moved over her face and she waited for the disappointment, braced herself for it. Instead, something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes, and he took a small step closer. "You're beautiful," he whispered, and the words were so quiet she almost thought she had imagined them. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I wrote to you that I was plain," she said, needing him to understand, to not build her up into something she was not. "I wanted you to know the truth." Ethan Abbott's mouth quirked, not quite a smile but close. "Then I guess we see different truths," he said. "Because standing here looking at you, plain is the last word I would use." Something fluttered in Ophelia's chest, fragile and afraid to hope. In Philadelphia, men had looked through her as though she were glass. Here, this cowboy with dust on his boots and gentleness in his eyes was looking at her like she was something precious. "I have a wagon," he said, gesturing down the street. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. We can get supplies tomorrow if you need anything, but I thought you might want to see your new home first." Her new home. The words sent a thrill through her, equal parts excitement and terror. "That sounds fine," she said. He reached for her carpet bag, his fingers brushing hers, and even that small contact sent awareness skittering up her arm. "Is this all you brought?" "I have a trunk on the stage," she said. "Everything I own is in there." He nodded and went to retrieve it, lifting the heavy trunk as though it weighed nothing. Ophelia followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to two patient horses. He loaded her trunk in the back with care, then turned and offered his hand to help her up to the seat. His palm was calloused, warm and steady, and she felt anchored by his touch. Ethan climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horses moved forward at his command, their hooves clopping against the packed earth of the main street. They passed a saloon where laughter spilled out into the afternoon, a general store with barrels of goods displayed on the porch, a church with a white steeple reaching toward the endless blue sky. Ophelia tried to memorize everything, wanting to know this place that would become her world. "Boise has been growing," Ethan said, his voice carrying easily over the creak of the wagon. "When I first came here 6 years ago, it was smaller. The railroad brought more people, more business. It is a good town, mostly peaceful." "Mostly?" Ophelia asked. "There are rough elements like anywhere," he said. "Cowboys who drink too much on Saturday nights, sometimes drifters looking for trouble, but Sheriff Morton keeps order well enough." They left the town behind, following a road that cut through rolling grassland dotted with sagebrush. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and magnificent, their peaks still holding snow even in September. The landscape was so different from Pennsylvania's green hills and dense forests that Ophelia felt as though she had traveled to another world entirely. The air smelled of dust and sage and something clean she could not name. Space stretched in every direction, vast and open, and it should have been frightening but instead felt like freedom. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wanting to fill the silence and also genuinely curious. Ethan glanced at her and she saw a flicker of pride in his eyes. "I have 300 acres, good grazing land, about 200 head of cattle right now which I am building up slowly. A few horses, chickens, a milk cow. The house is small but solid. I built most of it myself." He paused, then added, "I know it is not fancy. If you were expecting something grand, I am sorry." "I was not expecting grand," Ophelia said quickly. "I was expecting honest work and a life built by my own hands alongside someone else. That is what I came for." Something eased in his shoulders, tension releasing. "That is what I can offer," he said. "Honest work, a partnership. I will not lie and say ranching is easy because it is not, but the land is good and I think we can build something worthwhile here." "I am not afraid of work," Ophelia said. "My father ran a printing shop. I could set type before I was 10 years old. I helped with the press, cleaned the equipment, kept the books. I can cook and sew and tend a garden. I will earn my place here." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and the intensity of his gaze made her pulse quicken. "You already have a place here," he said quietly. "You came all this way on faith. That means something." The wagon rolled on, carrying them through the golden afternoon. Ophelia found herself sneaking glances at the man beside her. His hands on the reins were competent, his profile strong. She had agreed to marry a stranger, which was a kind of madness, but looking at him now, listening to the steady calm of his voice, she felt the first stirrings of something that might become affection given time. "What made you come west?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road. "I wanted land of my own," he said finally. "I grew up in Missouri, worked on my father's farm, but I was the youngest of 5 sons. There was nothing for me there. So I came west after the war, worked cattle drives, saved my money and bought my piece of ground. It is mine, every acre. Nobody can take that from me." There was something fierce in his voice, and Ophelia understood. Ownership, independence, the ability to build something lasting. Those desires resonated in her own chest. "And what made you send for a wife?" The question was bold, but she needed to know. Ethan's mouth curved slightly. "Loneliness," he said simply. "A ranch is a lot of work for one person, but more than that, I got tired of coming home to an empty house. I would sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sun set, and I would think about how much better it would be to have someone to share it with, someone to talk to build a life with." He glanced at her. "I am not a man who needs much, but I need that. Honesty." It stripped away pretense and left only truth between them. Ophelia felt something crack open inside her, a wall she had built after her parents died, after realizing how alone she was in the world. "I understand," she said. "After my parents passed, I felt like a ghost in Philadelphia. Nothing tethered me there. Your advertisement spoke about wanting a partner, not a decoration. That mattered to me." "You will be a partner here," Ethan said. "I give you my word on that." The road curved, and suddenly there were buildings ahead. A house first, small as he had warned but neat, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. The wood was weathered but solid. Beyond the house stood a barn, a chicken coop, a few outbuildings. A corral held several horses who lifted their heads to watch the wagon approach. Everything was tidy, well maintained. Speaking of a man who took pride in what he had built, Ethan brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He set the brake and jumped down, then came around to help Ophelia descend. This time, when his hand circled her waist to lift her down, she felt the strength in him, the solid reality of his presence. Her feet touched the ground, but he did not release her immediately, and she looked up to find his face very close. "Welcome home, Ophelia," he said, and her name in his low voice sounded like something treasured. "Thank you," she whispered. He released her and stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let me show you inside." The house had 3 rooms. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a wood stove, a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and shelves holding dishes and supplies. Everything was clean but sparse, functional rather than decorative. A doorway led to a bedroom with a large bed covered by a quilt, a dresser, and a wardrobe. Another smaller room held a narrow bed and a trunk. "I have been sleeping in the small room," Ethan said, and Ophelia felt her cheeks heat as she understood what he was telling her. "I thought you would want the larger room. We can figure out other arrangements after we are married." "When will we marry?" Ophelia asked, her heart beating hard. "I spoke with Reverend Walsh before I came to meet you," Ethan said. "He said he could perform the ceremony whenever we are ready. Tomorrow if you want. Or we could wait. Give you time to settle, to be sure." Ophelia looked around the house that would become hers, at the man who had called her beautiful when she had spent a lifetime being told she was ordinary. She thought about the long journey from Pennsylvania, about the faith required to travel toward an uncertain future. She had already made her choice when she boarded that first stage. Waiting would not change anything, would only stretch out the strangeness between them. "Tomorrow," she said. "If that suits you, I would like to marry tomorrow." Something flared in Ethan's eyes, bright and warm. "Tomorrow suits me fine," he said. He brought in her trunk, setting it carefully at the foot of the bed in the larger room. "I will let you get settled," he said. "I need to see to the horses and do the evening chores. There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring in more. If you are hungry, there is bread and some cold ham in the pantry." After he left, Ophelia stood in the quiet house and tried to absorb the enormity of the changes in her life. This morning she had been on a stage, exhausted and terrified. Now she was in a house that would be her home, preparing to marry a man who looked at her like she was something worth seeing. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe, arranging her hairbrush and small mirror on the dresser. She had brought her mother's silver locket, her father's watch, a book of poetry that had been a gift. These small treasures she placed on the bedside table, anchoring the room with pieces of her history. The light through the window was turning golden. Ophelia poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, scrubbing away the dust of travel. She changed into a fresh dress, this one green cotton that her mother had always said brought out her eyes. She brushed her hair until it gleamed, then twisted it up and pinned it in place. When she emerged from the bedroom, Ethan was not yet back. She explored the kitchen, finding the bread and ham he had mentioned, along with jars of preserves, dried beans, flour, coffee. She set about making supper, slicing the bread and ham, finding butter in a small cooler box outside the back door. She made coffee, strong and hot, and the familiar domestic task steadied her. The door opened as the sun was setting, and Ethan came in smelling of horses and hay. He stopped when he saw the table set for two, the food laid out, and something crossed his face too quickly to read. "You did not have to do that," he said. "You just arrived. You must be exhausted." "I wanted to," Ophelia said. "Besides, I am too nervous to be truly tired." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "I am nervous too," he admitted. "I have been thinking all day about what to say to you, how to make you feel welcome, and every word sounds foolish in my head." His honesty disarmed her. "You told me I was beautiful," she said. "That was not foolish." Ethan moved to the basin and washed his hands, then joined her at the table. They sat across from each other, and it should have been awkward but somehow was not. The food was simple, but they were both hungry, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before conversation began to flow more easily. He told her about the cattle, about his hopes to expand the herd, about the challenges of predators and harsh winters. She told him about the printing shop, about setting type in mirror image until she could read backwards as easily as forwards, about the smell of ink and paper that had been the backdrop of her childhood. They talked about small things and large, feeling out the shape of each other's minds, and with each word, the strangeness between them eased. After supper, they sat on the porch as the stars emerged one by one. The night was cool, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Ethan pointed out constellations, and Ophelia watched the sky transform into a sea of light. In Philadelphia, the city glow had dimmed the stars. Here, they burned fierce and bright, countless beyond measure. "I could never go back east," Ophelia said softly. "Not after seeing this sky." "Wait until winter," Ethan said. "You might change your mind when the snow is 3 feet deep and the wind cuts like a knife." She shook her head. "I will not change my mind." He looked at her, his face half shadowed in the starlight. "I am glad you are here, Ophelia," he said. "I did not realize how much I hoped you would be the right person until I saw you step off that stage, "And was I," she asked, "the right person?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Yes, you are." They sat until the cold drove them inside. Ethan banked the fire and made sure the house was secure while Ophelia lit a lamp in the bedroom. When he said good night, his voice was gentle, and she heard him settle into the small room that would be his for one more night only. Ophelia lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch. Horses moving in the corral, the wind in the grass, the creak of wood settling. Tomorrow she would become a wife. Tomorrow her life would truly begin. Fear and anticipation tangled together until she could not separate one from the other, and it was a long time before sleep found her. Morning arrived with rosy light and the sound of Ethan moving in the other room. Ophelia rose and dressed in her best dress, a dove-gray silk that had been her mother's, carefully preserved. She pinned her hair more elaborately than usual, letting a few curls frame her face, and fastened her mother's locket around her neck. When she emerged, Ethan was dressed in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked up as she entered and his eyes widened slightly. "You look lovely," he said. "Thank you," Ophelia replied, smoothing her skirts. "Are you ready?" "I am," he said. "But first, I have something for you." He crossed to the mantel and picked up a small box. When he opened it, a gold ring gleamed against dark velvet. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "The only thing of value my mother gave me when I left Missouri. I have been saving it, hoping I would find someone to give it to. I would be honored if you would wear it." Ophelia's throat tightened. The ring was simple, a plain gold band worn smooth with age, and it was more precious than any jeweled creation could have been because it represented continuity, family, trust. "I would be honored to wear it," she said. They rode to town in the wagon, the morning bright and clear. Boise was quieter on a Sunday morning, most people either in church or sleeping off Saturday night successes. Ethan drove to a small white church on the edge of town, and they went inside together. Reverend Walsh was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He greeted them warmly and did not seem surprised that they were strangers marrying for practical reasons. In the West, such arrangements were common. He called his wife and his son to serve as witnesses, and the four of them gathered before the simple altar. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Walsh spoke about commitment and faith, about building a life together through joy and hardship. When he asked if Ethan would take Ophelia as his wife, Ethan's voice was steady and sure. When he asked the same of Ophelia, she looked into Ethan's blue eyes and said yes with her whole heart. Ethan slid the gold band onto her finger, and it fit as though it had been made for her. The Reverend pronounced them married, and Ethan leaned down to kiss her, a soft, brief touch that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through her body. They signed the registry, making it legal and official. Reverend Walsh congratulated them. His wife pressed a jar of jam into Ophelia's hands as a wedding gift, and then they were outside again, married, bound together by law and promise. The ride back to the ranch felt different. Ophelia was acutely aware of the man beside her, her husband now. Ethan held the reins with one hand and reached for hers with the other, lacing their fingers together. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke of connection, of a bridge built between two people who had been strangers just a day before. "Are you sorry?" he asked quietly. "That there was no celebration, no family, no fuss?" "No," Ophelia said truthfully. "I think it was perfect, just us making our promises. That feels right." When they reached the ranch, Ethan lifted her down from the wagon, but this time he did not release her. His hand stayed at her waist and his eyes searched her face. "I know we have not known each other long," he said. "I will not rush you. We can take time to learn each other. I want you to feel safe here, Ophelia. I want you to be happy." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of his jaw beneath her palm. "I am safe," she said, "and I think I will be happy." He turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. Then he stepped back, breaking the moment. "I need to check on the cattle," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Will you be all right here for a few hours?" "I will be fine," she said. "I want to explore the house more, see what needs doing." After he left, Ophelia threw herself into work. She cleaned the kitchen thoroughly, scrubbing surfaces and organizing supplies. She discovered the root cellar out back, stocked with potatoes, onions, carrots, and apples. She found a sack of flour and sugar, lard, dried fruit. Enough for a good meal, a celebration of sorts. She made bread, kneading the dough until her arms ached, then set it to rise. She found a chicken in the cooler box and prepared it for roasting, seasoning it with herbs she found growing in a small patch near the house. She made an apple pie, crimping the edges with care, and slid it into the oven beside the chicken. The smells filled the house, and it began to feel like a home rather than just a building. Ethan returned as the sun was lowering, and she heard him stop on the porch, likely catching the scent of cooking. When he came inside, his face showed wonder. "Ophelia, you have been working all day," he said. "You should be resting." "I wanted to make us a wedding supper," she said. "We may not have had a celebration, but we can still mark the day." His throat worked as he swallowed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Nobody has ever done something like this for me." They ate by lamplight, the food rich and satisfying. Ophelia had found candles and lit them, casting a warm glow over the table. Ethan praised every dish, and his genuine appreciation made her efforts feel worthwhile. They talked more easily now, the conversation flowing without effort, and Ophelia realized she liked this man she had married. She liked his steadiness, his quiet competence, his kindness. Liking was not love, not yet, but it was a foundation on which love could be built. After supper, Ethan helped her clean up, drying dishes as she washed them. The domestic partnership felt natural, comfortable. When the kitchen was tidy, they stood looking at each other, and the awareness of the night ahead hung between them. "I meant what I said," Ethan said. "I will not rush you. We can wait as long as you need." Ophelia's heart beat hard against her ribs. She was nervous, but she was also curious, aware of the attraction that had been building since the moment she had seen him. "I do not want to wait," she said. "You are my husband. I want us to truly be married." Something flared in his eyes, heat and need carefully controlled. He offered his hand, and she took it. He led her to the bedroom, closing the door behind them for privacy, even though they were alone. The lamp on the bedside table cast golden light, and shadows danced on the walls. Ethan moved slowly, giving her time to change her mind. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, deeper than before, and Ophelia leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms, the heat of his skin through his shirt. He undressed her with careful hands, unlacing her dress and sliding it from her shoulders. She stood in her chemise and petticoats, feeling vulnerable and alive. His gaze moved over her, reverent, and when he whispered that she was beautiful again, she believed him. She helped him with his clothes, fumbling slightly with unfamiliar buttons, and when they were both bare, he lifted her and laid her on the bed with a gentleness that made tears prick her eyes. He was patient, attentive, making sure she was ready before joining their bodies. There was a moment of pain, brief and sharp, and then adjustment, and finally pleasure that built slow and steady like a fire catching hold. Afterward, he held her close, his arms wrapped around her, and Ophelia rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. She felt changed, marked by intimacy, and when she looked up at him, his eyes were soft. "Are you all right?" he asked, brushing hair back from her face. "I am more than all right," she said. "I am happy." He kissed her forehead, and they lay together as the lamp burned low. Eventually, sleep claimed them, tangled together in the bed that was now truly theirs. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Ophelia woke with the sun and made breakfast while Ethan did the morning chores. They ate together, then worked side by side or separately depending on what needed doing. She tended the vegetable garden, discovering a love for coaxing life from the earth. She collected eggs from the chickens, who learned to recognize her and came running when she appeared. She learned to milk the cow, her hands growing stronger with practice. Ethan taught her to ride one of the gentler horses, a bay mare named Stella. At first, Ophelia was terrified of the height, the power of the animal beneath her, but Ethan was patient, leading Stella around the corral until Ophelia began to relax. Within a week, she was riding out with him to check on the cattle, learning to spot trouble before it became serious. The physical work was harder than anything she had done in Philadelphia, and she fell into bed exhausted each night. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from accomplishment. Her hands developed calluses. Her skin tanned despite the bonnet she wore. Her body grew stronger, and through it all, her feelings for Ethan deepened. She learned his habits, his moods. She learned that he was quiet in the mornings until he had his coffee, that he worried more than he let on about money and weather and predators. She learned that he had a sense of humor that emerged slowly, dry observations that made her laugh. She learned that he was generous, riding to help a neighbor mend fence even though he had his own work waiting. She learned that when he made love to her at night, he was passionate and tender, always making sure she found pleasure before seeking his own. She was falling in love with him, and the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. One evening, about 3 weeks after their wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ethan held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist, and Ophelia felt content in a way she had never experienced before. "Are you sorry you came here?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet in the evening hush. Ophelia looked at him in surprise. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "It is a hard life, lonely sometimes. You gave up everything familiar to come to this strange place. I worry that you might regret it." She turned on the step to face him fully, taking his other hand so she held both. "Ethan Abbott, look at me," she said, and when he did, she continued. "I have never regretted coming here, not for one moment. Philadelphia was not home, not after my parents died. It was just a place I existed. Here I am alive. I wake up with purpose, I go to sleep satisfied, and I have you." She paused, gathering courage. "I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since you called me beautiful when I was certain I was anything but." His eyes widened, and then he pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that stole her breath. When he pulled back, his face was fierce. "I am already in love with you," he said. "I think I started falling when I read your first letter, the way you wrote so honestly about yourself. And when I saw you in person, so much braver than you knew, it sealed itself in my heart. I love you, Ophelia. I will love you until the day I die." She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it, and he responded with equal fervor. They stumbled inside, barely making it to the bedroom before coming together with an urgency born of emotion spoken aloud at last. They made love with abandon, and afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Ophelia felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. The seasons turned. Autumn deepened into winter, and with it came the harsh weather Ethan had warned about. Snow fell heavy, blanketing the world in white. The temperature plummeted, and ice formed thick on the water troughs. Ethan worked from before dawn until after dark, making sure the cattle survived, that the horses were fed, that everything was secured against the storms that rolled down from the mountains with frightening speed. Ophelia worked equally hard, keeping the house warm, cooking meals that would fuel them through the cold, mending clothes and making new ones. She learned to render lard, to make soap, to preserve food. The skills her mother had taught her came back, and she improvised when she did not know how to do something, learning through trial and error. They were snowed in for a week in January, the world reduced to their small house and the buildings they could reach by following ropes Ethan had strung for safety. During those days, they talked for hours, played cards, read aloud from the few books they owned. They made love often, seeking warmth and connection and the affirmation of life in the midst of winter's harshness. When the thaw finally came in March, Ophelia felt as though they had been tested and had passed. They had survived the winter together, had grown closer rather than strained. She knew Ethan's moods now, could read his silences. He knew her fears and comforted them without being asked. They were partners in truth, working as a team to build the life they wanted. Spring brought new life. Calves were born, wobbly-legged and vulnerable. Ethan was up at all hours helping difficult births, and Ophelia stood by his side, learning to assist. She cried the first time a calf did not survive, but Ethan held her and reminded her that death was part of ranching, something to be mourned but accepted. The garden came back to life, and Ophelia planted seeds, expanding the plot. She added more vegetables, planted herbs, even coaxed a few flower seeds into blooming. The bright spots of color made her smile every time she saw them. In April, Ophelia realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited, not wanting to say anything until she was sure, but when another month passed, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. Joy and fear warred in her chest. She wanted a child, wanted to raise a family with Ethan, but she was also terrified of childbirth, of the dangers it posed. She told him one evening after supper, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. Ethan's face transformed, joy lighting him from within. He swept her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of spun glass. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Ophelia asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said. "You have given me everything, Ophelia. A home, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." He was attentive before, but now he became almost overly protective. He did not want her to lift anything heavy, to work too hard, to do anything that might put her or the baby at risk. Ophelia bore his concern with patience, understanding it came from love, though she also insisted on continuing to contribute. She was pregnant, not helpless. The summer was hot and long, and Ophelia's body changed in ways both wondrous and uncomfortable. Her belly swelled, and she felt the baby move for the first time in late June, a flutter like wings inside her. Ethan would place his hand on her stomach in the evenings, marveling when he felt the baby kick. They prepared the small room, transforming it from Ethan's temporary quarters into a nursery. Ophelia sewed tiny clothes, blankets, diapers. Ethan built a cradle, sanding it smooth and lining it with soft fabric. They chose names, arguing good-naturedly over options before settling on Edward if it was a boy, after Ethan's father, or Olivia if it was a girl, after Ophelia's mother. In September, as the world began to cool again, Ophelia felt the first pains. They started slow, an aching in her back that gradually moved around to her belly. She labored through the night, Ethan by her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. He had ridden to fetch the midwife, a practical woman named Mrs. Jensen, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The birth was hard. Ophelia lost herself in the pain, in the primal work of bringing life into the world. She screamed, she cried, she gripped Ethan's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers. But he never left her, never faltered, and when the baby finally emerged in the gray light of dawn, his cry was the most beautiful sound Ophelia had ever heard. "A boy," Mrs. Jensen announced, placing the squirming infant on Ophelia's chest. "A healthy boy." Ophelia looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair and tiny perfect fingers, and love crashed over her so powerfully she could not breathe. Ethan leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face, and when he kissed her forehead, she tasted salt. "Edward," he said. "Our Edward, Mrs." Jensen stayed for a few days, making sure Ophelia recovered properly and teaching her how to nurse the baby, how to care for him. Then she left, satisfied that all was well, and Ophelia and Ethan were alone with their son. The first weeks were exhausting. Edward woke every few hours to eat, day and night, and Ophelia felt perpetually tired. But there was also profound joy in the weight of him in her arms, in watching Ethan hold his son with such tenderness, in seeing the family they were becoming. The years unfolded like the pages of a well-loved book. Edward grew from infant to toddler, learning to walk and talk, exploring the ranch with the fearless curiosity of childhood. When he was 2, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again, and this time she was less frightened, more confident. Their daughter was born in spring, and they named her Rose for the wild roses that bloomed on the hillsides. The ranch prospered. Ethan's careful management and hard work paid off, and the herd grew. They added more land, built a larger barn, improved the house with an added room and a covered walkway to the well. Money was never abundant, but it was enough, and they never went without necessities. Ophelia became part of the community. She made friends with neighboring ranch wives, women who understood the isolation and hardship of their chosen lives. They gathered when they could, helping with quilting or canning, sharing advice and companionship. She joined the church, sang in the choir, brought food when someone was sick or grieving. Ethan served on the town council for a term, using his steady judgment to help resolve disputes and plan for Boise's future. He was respected, known as a fair man and a hard worker. When rustlers troubled the area one summer, he joined the posse that tracked them down and recovered the stolen cattle. Through it all, Ophelia and Ethan's love deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of their early days settled into something steadier but no less powerful. They knew each other's bodies, hearts, and minds. They fought sometimes, because any two people living in close quarters would, but they always talked through their disagreements, always came back to the foundation of love and respect they had built. When Edward was 5 and Rose was 3, Ophelia found herself pregnant again. This time the baby came quickly, a little girl with coppery hair like her mother's. They named her Clara, and she completed their family. Ethan built onto the house again, adding 2 more bedrooms so the children did not have to share cramped quarters. He taught Edward to ride, to rope, to handle cattle. Ophelia taught Rose and Clara to cook and sew and read, determined her daughters would have education and choices. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Ethan hired hands during busy seasons, young men looking to learn the trade. He was a patient teacher, firm but fair, and several of the hands stayed for years, becoming part of the extended ranch family. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Ophelia and Ethan would sit on the porch as they had that first night. Time had weathered them both. Ethan's hair was shot through with gray, and lines had deepened around his eyes. Ophelia's hands were work-worn, and she moved with the slower care of someone whose body had labored hard. But when Ethan looked at her, his eyes still held the wonder they had that day at the stage stop. "You are still beautiful," he would say, and she would laugh and call him a fool, but her heart would warm nonetheless. One evening, when Edward was 12 and talking about wanting his own horse to train, Rose was 10 and reading every book she could find, and Clara was 8 and running wild through the fields, Ophelia leaned against Ethan's shoulder and sighed with contentment. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" she asked. "How we were strangers, and I was so certain I was plain and unremarkable." Ethan wrapped his arm around her. "I think about it often," he said. "I think about how your letter was honest and real when so many people hide behind pretty words. I think about how you stepped off that stage looking terrified but determined. I think about how you have made every single day since then better than the one before. I wrote that I was plain because I did not want you to be disappointed," Ophelia said. "I had spent so long being invisible that I forgot I might be seen." "I saw you," Ethan said. "From the first moment I saw you exactly as you are, beautiful, brave, strong, everything I did not know I was looking for." She tilted her face up and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that still held the spark of their early passion. "I love you, Ethan Abbott," she said. "I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Ophelia Abbott," he replied. "You took a chance on a stranger's advertisement and traveled across the country on faith. You gave me everything I never dared to hope for. I am grateful every single day that you chose this life, that you chose me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars they had watched on their wedding night all those years ago. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch hummed with quiet life. And in the morning, they would wake and work and love and live, building their legacy one day at a time. Edward grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick mind. He took over more of the ranch work as Ethan's body began to feel the toll of decades of hard labor. Rose became a teacher, opening a small school in Boise and educating children whose parents had never learned to read. Clara, wild and free, surprised everyone by marrying a doctor and moving to Boise proper, where she helped him run his practice with efficiency and compassion. Grandchildren came, filling the ranch house with laughter and chaos during visits. Ethan built a swing in the big oak tree by the house, and children took turns soaring into the sky while he pushed them, his face creased with joy. As they aged, Ethan and Ophelia slowed. Their bodies ached in the mornings, and tasks that had once been easy required more effort. But they had Edward to help, and the hired hands, and they learned to accept assistance with grace. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Edward and his wife organized a celebration. Friends and neighbors gathered at the ranch, filling tables with food, sharing stories and laughter. Ethan and Ophelia stood together, surrounded by the community they had helped build, by the family they had created, and Ophelia felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan as they danced slowly to a fiddler's tune. "Thank you for seeing me when I thought I was invisible. Thank you for loving me into the woman I became." "You were always that woman," Ethan said. "I just had the privilege of witnessing it." They danced until the stars came out, and when the guests finally left, they stood on their porch and looked out over the land they had nurtured for a quarter century. The mountains rose dark against the sky. The wind whispered through the grass. An owl called from the barn. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Ophelia said, as she always replied. "This life, this love, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." They went inside together, hand in hand, and closed the door on another day in the life they had built from faith and honesty and love. As the years continued to pass, Ethan's health began to decline. A fall from a horse left him with a limp that never fully healed. His breathing grew labored on cold days, but his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Ophelia never wavered. She cared for him as he had once cared for her, and there was a sweetness in their dependence on each other, a circle completing itself. On a warm afternoon in late summer, when Ethan was 65 and Ophelia 62, they sat on their porch as they had countless times before. Edward ran the ranch now, with his own sons learning the trade. Rose's school thrived, teaching a new generation. Clara had given them 5 grandchildren, all healthy and bright. "We did well," Ethan said, his voice softer than it used to be but still steady. "Did we not? We did better than well," Ophelia said. "We built something lasting. Look at our children, our grandchildren. Look at this place. It will endure." Ethan took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture worn smooth by repetition. "I need you to know something," he said. "That day at the stage stop when I saw you for the first time, my heart knew before my mind did. It knew you were the one I had been waiting for. And every day since has proven it right." Tears pricked Ophelia's eyes. "I felt it too," she said. "The recognition, like coming home to a place I had never been." They sat in silence, watching the sun lower toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The beauty of it never diminished, never became ordinary, and Ophelia felt grateful for eyes that could still see wonder, for a heart that could still feel joy. "Thank you for whispering that I was beautiful," she said. "It changed everything." "You are beautiful," Ethan said. "You were then, you are now, you always will be. Beauty is not about features or youth. It is about the light inside a person, and yours has never stopped shining." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against her hair, and they stayed that way until the stars emerged. Ethan passed peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, and Ophelia grieved with the depth of someone who had lost half of herself. But even in her sorrow, she felt gratitude for the decades they had shared, for the love that had sustained them. She wore his grandmother's ring until her own death, 10 years after his, and when she closed her eyes for the last time, her children holding her hands, her last thought was of a dusty afternoon in September 1878, when a cowboy had looked at her and seen beauty where she had only seen plainness. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a stone that reads simply, "Ethan and Ophelia Abbott, beloved, together always." And around them, the land they had loved and worked and nurtured continued, home to their descendants, testament to the life built from faith and letters, and a whispered word that changed everything. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of how Ethan and Ophelia met, how she traveled across the country to marry a stranger, how he saw her beauty when she could not see it herself, how they built a life and a legacy that endured. The story became part of the family's foundation, a reminder that love could grow from honest beginnings, that taking chances could lead to joy, that seeing someone truly was the greatest gift you could offer. The ranch itself remained in the family for generations. Edward's sons took over from him, and their children after them. The original house was preserved, maintained with care, and inside it still held remnants of Ethan and Ophelia's life together. The rocking chair where she had nursed 3 babies, the table where they had eaten countless meals, the bed where they had loved and laughed and dreamed. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, those who lived there swore they could feel a presence, warm and content, as though the love that had filled those walls had seeped into the very wood and would never truly leave. The story of Ethan and Ophelia became legend in Boise, told and retold, a reminder of the Wild West era when people took chances, when letters bridged vast distances, when love could bloom in the harsh beauty of Idaho Territory. Their descendants spread across the West, carrying with them the values Ethan and Ophelia had lived by: hard work, honesty, the courage to see truly and be seen, the understanding that beauty was not about perfection, but about the light of a genuine soul. And in each generation, there were some who inherited Ophelia's coppery hair or Ethan's blue eyes, physical markers of a lineage built on love. But more than physical traits, they inherited the story, the knowledge that their family began with a woman who thought she was plain and a man who saw her beauty, with letters exchanged across distance and faith rewarded. They inherited the understanding that home was not just a place, but the people you chose to build a life with. That legacy was measured not in money or land, but in love given and received. And so the story continued, woven into the fabric of a family, a ranch, a community. Long after the Wild West became history, long after Boise grew from a frontier town into a thriving city, long after the original homesteaders were nothing but names on stones and fading photographs, the love story of Ethan and Ophelia endured. It endured because it was true, because it touched something fundamental about human hope and courage, because it proved that taking a chance on love, even when you felt unworthy, could transform everything. The letter Ophelia had written, stating plainly that she was ordinary, was preserved in a family Bible, carefully protected. Beside it was the first letter Ethan had written in response, and though most of it spoke of practical matters, there was a line near the end that read, "I believe beauty lies in honesty, and your honest words tell me more about your true self than any false flattery could. I look forward to meeting the woman behind the words." Generations would read those letters and understand that their family's foundation was built on seeing past surface to substance, on valuing truth over pretense. In the early days of their marriage, Ophelia had kept a journal. She recorded the daily tasks, the weather, the growth of the ranch, but she also wrote about her feelings, her growing love, her wonder at the life she had found. One entry, written a month after their wedding, read, "I came west expecting duty and received devotion. I thought I knew what marriage would be, a partnership of labor and survival. I did not know it could also be joy. Ethan makes me laugh. He listens when I speak. He holds me at night as though I am precious. I am learning that I do not have to be beautiful in the way Philadelphia society measured beauty. I can simply be myself, and that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything." Another entry, written years later when Edward was a toddler and she was pregnant with Rose, showed how her confidence had grown. "Today, Edward pointed at me and said, 'Pretty mama,' and I did not correct him. Once I would have deflected the compliment, uncomfortable with any praise of my appearance. But Ethan has taught me to accept kindness, to believe that I am seen and valued. I am no longer the uncertain girl who stepped off that stage. I am a woman who knows her worth, who works hard and loves fiercely. The West has changed me, or perhaps it simply revealed who I always was beneath the doubts." These journals became treasured family documents, passed down carefully, read by daughters and granddaughters who found strength in Ophelia's words. They saw in her journey a universal truth, that we are often our own harshest critics, that what we perceive as plainness others may see as beauty, that love can heal the wounds of self-doubt. Ethan had not been a journal keeper, but he had written occasional letters to his brother back in Missouri. In one, penned 5 years into his marriage, he wrote, "You asked if I regret not marrying a local girl, someone I could have courted properly. I regret nothing. Ophelia came to me through letters and faith, and she has proven to be exactly what I needed. She is strong when I falter, gentle when I am harsh, wise when I am uncertain. She has given me children who fill this house with life, and she has made a home of what was just a shelter. I do not know what I did to deserve such a partner, but I thank God for her every day. Tell Mother her ring rests on the finger of a woman worthy of the legacy it represents. These fragments of their story, preserved through letters and journals, and the memories passed down through oral tradition, painted a picture of a marriage that had not been perfect but had been true. Ethan and Ophelia had struggled with the same challenges all couples faced. They had disagreed about how to discipline the children, about whether to expand the ranch or consolidate, about money and time and priorities. But they had always come back to the foundation of respect and love, always remembered that they were partners choosing each other every day. One particular story became a favorite among their descendants. When Edward was 8, he had come home from school in tears because other boys had teased him about his mother being a mail-order bride, implying there was something shameful in it. Ophelia had sat him down and told him the truth. "Some people think there is only one proper way to meet and marry," she had said. "But your father and I found each other through letters, through honesty, through faith. There is no shame in that. Every marriage starts differently, but what matters is what you build together. Your father and I have built a good life, a loving family, a successful ranch. That is what matters. Not how we started, but what we created." Edward had carried those words with him, and when he grew up, he told his own children the same thing. Different paths could lead to the same destination. What mattered was not the method, but the commitment. The ranch itself bore witness to Ethan and Ophelia's life together. The oak tree where Ethan had built swings for the children grew tall and strong, its branches spreading wide to shelter picnics and gatherings. The garden Ophelia had tended expanded over the years, and someone in the family always maintained it, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers in her memory. The house, enlarged and updated over time, still held the original main room where they had shared their first meal, where they had sat by the fire on winter nights, where family gathered for every major occasion. The gold ring, Ethan's grandmother's ring that he had given Ophelia on their wedding day, stayed in the family. When Ophelia died, she had asked that it be given to Edward's wife, who wore it proudly. After her death, it passed to the next generation, always given to the bride who married into the Abbott family, a tangible link to the love story that had started everything. And on the hill where Ethan and Ophelia were buried, wildflowers bloomed every spring. Descendants would visit the grave, standing quietly in the wind, and feel connected to ancestors they had never met but whose love had made their existence possible. They would trace the words on the headstone and remember that they came from people who had taken chances, who had believed in possibility, who had seen each other truly. In the end, the story of Ethan and Ophelia was not remarkable because it was unique. Mail-order marriages were common in the Wild West, born of necessity and practicality. What made their story endure was the way they had transformed practicality into love, the way they had chosen to see past surface to soul, the way they had built something lasting from unpromising beginnings. Ophelia had written in her letter that she was plain, wanting to manage expectations, wanting to protect herself from disappointment. Ethan had seen her and whispered, "You're beautiful," speaking a truth she had not known she needed to hear. That moment, that recognition, had changed the trajectory of both their lives. It had given Ophelia permission to see herself differently, to inhabit her own life with confidence. It had given Ethan a partner who matched his strength with her own. From that single moment sprang a marriage, a family, a legacy. The ranch prospered through their labor. The children grew strong through their love. The community benefited from their participation and generosity. And long after they were gone, the ripples of that first meeting continued to spread outward, touching lives they would never know. For in the end, love stories matter not because they are perfect, but because they are true. Ethan and Ophelia's love was tested by hardship, by loss, by the grinding difficulty of ranching life. But it endured because it was rooted in honesty, in seeing and being seen, in choosing each other again and again through all the days of their lives. Their descendants would face different challenges in different times, but they carried forward the lesson Ethan and Ophelia had lived. That love requires courage, that beauty is deeper than appearance, that home is built through daily choice and commitment. These truths, passed down through generations, formed the true inheritance, more valuable than land or money. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of their own lives, those descendants would think about a September day in 1878, about a stage arriving in Boise, about a nervous woman in a dusty dress and a cowboy with gentle eyes. They would think about letters exchanged across distance, about faith rewarded, about a whispered word that changed everything. And they would feel grateful, connected across time to the love that had made their own lives possible, inspired to see truly and love bravely in their own relationships. This was the gift Ethan and Ophelia left behind. Not just property or possessions, but a story that reminded everyone who heard it that love could grow in unexpected places, that taking chances could lead to joy, that seeing another person's true beauty was a gift that transformed both giver and receiver. Their love story became a touchstone, a reminder that in the harsh beauty of the Wild West, or anywhere else for that matter, genuine connection between two people could create something that outlasted stone and memory, something that lived on in the hearts and lives of all those who came after. And so their story ended where all good love stories end. Not with death, but with legacy, with love that transcended time, with proof that two people who choose each other completely can build something that endures long after they are gone. Ethan and Ophelia lived, loved, and died, but what they created together, the family and the story and the lesson of seeing truly, that lived on forever.